Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel Let's Learn with Lizzie. In today's English grammar class, we are diving into active and passive voice. By the end of this lesson, you will know exactly when and how to use both voices and how to change a sentence from one to another. Let's dive in. What is a voice? Voice refers to the form of a verb that shows whether the subject acts or is acted upon. In grammar, voice tells us who is performing the action in the subject. Is the subject doing something or is something being done to it? Basically, there are two types of voice: active voice and passive voice. Active voice is where the subject acts and performs the action. In passive voice, the subject is acted upon or something is being done to the subject. Now let's get into active voice in detail. What is active voice? Here, when sentence is in active voice, the subject is doing something. The sentence is direct and strong. The subject does the action. The focus is on the doer. So who is the doer over here? The subject is the doer. The structure of the active voice is quite simple. You have a subject which is performing the action, that is the verb, and then you are having an object. For example, the teacher explains the topic. Here, the teacher is the subject, explains is the verb. What is the teacher explaining? The teacher explains the topic, which becomes the object. Another example for you, the cat chased the mouse. Here, the cat is the subject, chased is the verb, what it chased, the mouse, is the object. So in these examples, it is quite evident that in active voice, the subject is active, which is doing the action, the doer of the sentence. It usually flows in this order: subject, verb plus object. I hope it is very clear to you. Now let's move on to the passive voice. What is passive voice? Here, the focus shifts to the receiver of the action, not the doer. So it is like you are swapping the whole structure of active voice. The center focus is given to the object, and then you are having a form of be, that is to be form, which is am is are, was and were, based on the tense of the sentence. Then you are having a past participle joined with by a prepositional word, and next you are having a subject which is actually optional. Remember that the by and subject is optional, it's not mandatory. For example, the topic is explained by the teacher. Here, the topic is actually the object of the sentence. Now the object, the topic has now become the subject of the sentence. Why? Because in this sentence, we are talking about the topic. But basically, the topic is not doing the action. It is receiving the action. As the sentence clearly says, the topic is explained by the teacher. Here, in this sentence, the subject is acting as a receiver, not a doer like active voice. Here's another example for you. The mouse was chased by the cat. Now, again, if you notice how the focus is no longer on who did it, but on what was done. Most importantly, you must know where you will use and when you will use the passive voice. The passive voice is used when the doer is unknown. For example, the window was broken. We don't know who did it, right? So I will simply use passive voice. The window was broken. Next, the situation is when the doer is unimportant. You don't want to mention the person who has done the action. You don't want to mention the doer, or you feel like the doer of the action is unimportant in the sentence. Then you will be using passive voice. For example, mistakes were made. Made by whom? Is it important in the sentence? No. Actually, mistakes were made is the most important thing that I wanted to mention to my audience. So I have written mistakes were made. Finally, we are having the third situation where you will use passive voice is when you want a formal objective tone, especially in scientific or academic writing. Other than that, don't try to overuse passive voices, because passive voice is like an indirect way of saying certain things. So here is the structure of the active and passive voice in relation to the tenses. So in simple present, we are writing, she writes a letter. So a letter is written by her is the passive voice. As you can see it very clearly, it is quite evident that it is following the structure. You're having the subject, verb, object. In passive voice, the object becomes the subject. Then we are having be form, V3 form, that is past participle, by her preposition form, and the objective pronoun of she. In present continuous, she is writing a letter. Again, she, subject, is writing, verb, a letter, object. Now, when you're converting it into passive form, a letter is being written by her. In present perfect, she has written a letter. She, subject, has written, verb, a letter, object. Here, a letter, object has come before. Be form has been written, V3 form, by her. Simple past. She wrote a letter. She, subject, wrote, verb, a letter. When you're converting it into the passive form, you just have to change the be form and the V3 form. The structure is quite simple and common for all tenses. You just need to change the be form of the verb and add the respective words according to the tense. A letter was written by her. If you notice it very clearly, I have just changed the to be form because it is showing my tense. Again, will be written in the future form. Will is denoting the future and be is very important because I need a be form in the passive voice structure. I hope it is very clear for you. If you are having any doubts, you can mention it in the comment section so that I can make another video clarifying your doubt. Now let's focus on 3 simple tips to change the voices. First thing you have to do is to identify the subject, verb and object, as I already mentioned in the last slide. Swap the object to the subject position. So next we are doing the swapping of the subject and the object. Finally, use the correct be form and past participle form. As I told you, so here is the structure once again for you. In passive voice, we are having the object plus be form plus V3 plus by subject, which is optional. Next, active voice is quite easy for you. I hope you don't want it to be repeated again, but still I'm doing it for you. Subject plus verb plus object. So now let's focus on some examples. He paints the wall. Let's focus on the 3 steps. First step, you're going to identify the subject, verb and object. He, subject, paints, verb. What he paints? The wall, object. So now I'm going to swap the position of the subject and the object. Let's do the swapping. The wall is coming in the beginning and by him becomes the object over here. To be form is painted, V3. To be form is painted is V3 form. So the sentence is the wall is painted by him. Another example for you. The chef cooked dinner. The chef is the subject. Cooked is the verb. Dinner is the object. So now I'm swapping the subject and the object. The dinner was cooked. Why I have used was? Because here the sentence is in the past tense. Remember, you have to change the to be form according to the tense of the sentence. So in the first sentence, it was in the present tense. So I have used is painted. But the next sentence is actually written in the past tense. So I will be using was cooked by the chef. That becomes my subject. This sentence can actually make sense even without the subject. As I can say, the dinner was cooked. If I don't want to mention the chef, but here I have mentioned it because the sentence is demanding for it. Next, when to use active and passive voice. So let's have a clear look towards it. Active voice is used when you want clarity and directness. Why? Because you are mentioning every single detail, right? The active voice is used in stories, essays, and conversation because clarity is very important when you are trying to portray certain things. Whereas, on the other hand, we are having passive voice, which is used when the action matters more than the doer because I'm not bothered about the person who is doing the action. Rather, I want much focus on the action which is done in the sentence. It is used in formal writing, newspaper articles, and research papers. Why? Because I need the content. Rather, I don't want who did the content or who is writing the content. You don't always need to include by plus doer and passive voice, as I already told you. If it is obvious and or unimportant, just leave it out. So, okay, folks, let's have a practice session. Can you tell which voice these sentences are in? The first one, the glass was broken. Let me give you a quick trip. First, identify the subject of the sentence. Here, according to the sentence, the glass is the subject. Now, ask a very simple question. Is my subject doing the action or receiving the action? Okay, so the glass was broken. It is quite evident that the subject is not doing the action. So I can identify that this is a passive voice. And the another trick, that is to use the structure B V3. That is also an easy way. They play football every evening. Who is the subject here? They are the subject. Now, play is the verb. Here is the subject doing the action or receiving the action. Of course, they can play football, right? They is referring to living people who are doing the action over here. So it is active voice because my subject is the doer, rather the receiver. The result will be announced tomorrow. Let's parse it. The result subject will be announced. Now, the result. Can a result come on its own? No. Here, the result is receiving the action. So, it is my passive voice. Another way of finding whether it is a passive voice is to focus on its structure. Will be B form and announced V3 form. So, it's quite simple, right? Now let's focus on the changing of active voice to passive voice or vice versa. The dog chased the cat. The dog is the subject, chased is the verb, what it chased the cat. So the dog is the doer of the sentence. I have to change it into passive voice. So it will be the cat was chased by the dog. Why? Because it is in the past tense. Next, the mail is delivered every morning. They will build a new hospital. So why don't you pause the video and take a moment to write down the answers? Viola, why don't you now check your answers whether it was correct or wrong? If you still have any doubt, kindly ping me in the comment section. Now, what are the common mistakes that we have to avoid while focusing on voices? First common mistake is we tend to use the wrong B form. Always remember, stick to the B form. It is quite simple. If it is a simple tense, you're just going to use is or are or was or were. If it is continuous tense, you're going to use is are, was, or were plus being form, since it has to focus on the continuous. Next, for perfect tense, have or has been. Very simple, right? If it is past perfect, you're going to use had been. I hope it's very clear now. Always remember the structure. First comes the object plus to be form of verb. Then we are having V3. Then by, subject, optional. This is quite optional. Remember that. So, for example, the cake was baked. This is the right one, not was baking. Here you cannot say that the cake was baking. The cake was not baking on its own, right? The cake was baked by somebody, a chef or a person. Final common mistake that we tend to do is adding unnecessarily by form. You add by only when you are focusing on the doer. When you are adding the doer, use by. Otherwise, the passive voice is not asking you to use the by mandatorily. As I have given in the structure, that it is optional, because remember that though in the structure I have written object here, but still it is the subject according to the grammar. So now let's have a quick recap of what we learned throughout the session. So active voice is the voice where subject does the action. Passive voice is the one where the subject receives the action. You use passive only when needed, whereas you have to focus on tense and verb form, which matters a lot. To wrap up, remember active is equal to direct, passive focuses on action. Use both smartly depending on what you are writing. Well, here's a challenge for you. Change the sentence below into passive voice and post your answer in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this video was helpful for you. See you in the next video.